Bill Harrison is a user experience architect for Dell as well, with an affinity for design and content. He has created and maintained design libraries for 2 Fortune 200 companies, Dell and the United Services Automobile Association. Bill spent more than a decade in the user experience field, 2 decades in online and print journalism, and 4 decades scribbling, scratching, and sketching in various art media. And Ashley Eaton is also joining us, and she is a digital librarian for the Dell Design Library. Please welcome Ashley, Jim, and Bill.
All right, thank you. There's only a couple of reasons why you're in this room. One, you're lost. The Muppets are next door. And if that's the case, I won't be offended if you go now, but go now. 2, the other reason is that you find documentation or library science interesting, and if that's the case, I'm sorry as well. But we do, so that's why we're here. Again, my name's Jim Makajewski. I have been with Dell unofficially for a little over 4 years when Dell acquired Perot Systems, a local company here in Dallas. I moved down to Austin shortly after that acquisition and started working with the global site design team of Dell. The global site design team is one of the very first global, truly global, cross-functional design groups within Dell's history. They've never attacked design from a holistic point of view. Our mission is to become an in-house agency, a world-leading in-house digital design agency through the balance of art, commerce, agility, and innovation, and strategy and execution. So, yeah, a lot on that plate. And our charter, just for note, is to be simple, intuitive, and to bring Dell's online experience driven by customer needs. We have a lot of work to do. Like I said before, Dell has never attacked any design project across the board. It's always been siloed. And Dell's online experience has always been very segmented and continues to be today, despite our, our efforts over the last couple of years. Dell's online presence started really early. 1996, Dell launched Dell.com, and within 6 months started selling about $1 million a day in revenue. The boom happened, and Dell was at the forefront of online experiences for e-commerce. And then most of us know what happened after that. And Dell's continued to try to regain that position with some success here and there, but has never kind of recaptured that. A few years ago, Michael Dell put his foot down and decided it was time for Dell to recapture what it once had. And that was the creation of a program called eDell and the creation of the global site design team, which I'm a part of. Our goal is to fill out that red part of this very vague graph and to return Dell to what it once had and being a leader in e-commerce and a leader online, and hopefully to boost up Dell's brand and image worldwide. All right, so how do we plan to do that? We're responsible for 24 or so million pages worldwide right now. That's a lot. It's so much that we actually don't have a sitemap for the site, and we really don't know everything that's out there. It's kind of like mapping the universe. It just, we find new stuff all the time. To rebuild something like that, we had to establish a pretty solid foundation to start from, and that's what we've been doing for the last 1.5 to 2 years, is building out this foundation, and that is the Dell Design Library. The library is intended to hold this modular design system that has been created. Small number of parts, templates, those kinds of things that could be used infinitely, in theory. And I say almost infinitely there. We come across new things all the time. The web continues to evolve. We continue to keep up. But for the most part, this foundation has been proving to be pretty extensible. And those parts, along with their instructions for how to use them, that's what the library is. And it's important to point out here that this has never been done at Dell before. And we're talking about a company of over 100,000 employees. We're in 30 some odd countries worldwide. And we've never had instructions for how to build web pages. And that's kind of amazing to me. 24 million of them. All right, so the goals are pretty simple. Consistency. Consistency across the UI, consistency across our projects. That's paramount, and that leads to efficiency and to become faster at what we do. Our team is relatively small, and we support a global Dell. And if we don't become more efficient in providing guidance and direction on how the web is built for Dell, we will fail. Ultimately, happier customers. And if you don't know who the Dell dude is, I'm sorry. All right, so with that, I'm gonna get Bill to talk a little bit about this. But we started the library built upon a framework provided by ModX, which is a very robust content and document management tool. We partnered with ModX 3.5 or so years ago to start this conversation around the library. And ModX has given us the ability to do some pretty amazing things that we'll show in a minute.
The thing that attracted us to ModX first was its flexibility. A lot of the kind of blogging or documentation software you see out there is very regimented and very clunky. We wanted the ability to use ModX's framework to create our own classification systems and also create our own user privileges. So we've got different types of experiences that different people will see once they come to the library. So an administrator will be able to see all the functionality. A content editor will be able to upload documents and edit things. And just someone who's consuming the content will just basically present it with the content. For our agency partners or external partners, they'll get their own view. We wanted this to be very customizable to what people will see. One other thing to note about the library that you'll see in a bit is that it's open. If you go to DellDesignLibrary.com, you'll see a lot of the functionality there. There are very few things that we've put behind a login preventing content for people to see. So feel free to go out there and take a look after the presentation. With the, again, kind of speaking to some of the features of ModX, customizable HTML or CMS. You're not limited to themes. We have template variables that can, again, play with the classification system and the chunking of the pages. And again, create the site structure and create the content or build out the site based on the structure and not just manualized code. Also the ability to create versions. So if we've got something that's in development versus something in production, we'll be able to see what's in development alongside what's in production.
Yeah, and the great thing about this is ModX is the background. You know, it's a back-end system that we're building this all on, and the extensibility of it is pretty robust. You know, HTML5 doesn't scare us. Any future you know, technology really doesn't scare us either. We can ultimately support it with the same backend, and that's been huge. Yep.
With taking a look at what's in the library, a lot of what people are familiar with are patterns, kind of in the industry. And patterns, if you go to the Interaction IXDA site, you'll find listings of different pattern libraries. When we first started this project, we went through kind of the normal exercises that information architects or UX architects go through. We did an audit of what patterns we had and what patterns we needed. We interviewed users and determined what capabilities they wanted to see. And we wanted to create things in the library that fundamentally are reusable and repeatable. A lot of the trappings of being in a large organization are, well, there's a couple of them. One is the telephone game. I mean, if you create a solution and you don't write it down and then someone else tells someone else how to do it and it's incorrect, especially if you pass it from person to person to person, then eventually that's going to create inefficiency and a lot of redesign work. Also, just being in meetings with siloed design groups, sometimes solutions will be made and no one will write it down, and then they'll just disappear. And then 2 months later, another group will have to go through the same churn to create that same the same solution until it gets put in the library where people can reuse it without having that churn from project to project. The way we've looked at patterns is with how they're defined and how they've been defined by Jared Spool and Nathan Curtis, is patterns are more of the visual and the interaction specs, and there's another type of library that's out there called components, and those are more code-oriented, both front-end and hopefully production code that can serve both front-end and back-end developers. We want to merge these two things. We'd like to provide the rationale for why patterns are made, and also provide some tangible code examples that people can use practically. A lot of the pattern libraries that you'll see out there, if you do research, is some of them are very academic. But of course, when you're in your own organization, you have to map those patterns to your own business rules and your own interaction specs. With the patterns that we have within the library, they're also integrated with other documentation types that we have, like the complete templates, basically the functionality that we have within our content management system, the templates that are served there, blueprints, more of a repeatable site design that can be used across several similar site sections, launch layouts or pages. These are basically project-specific wireframes and sitemaps that utilize the patterns but are basically they're somewhat invalid once they get to production, because with our content management system, we can lay things out, but then once it gets to production, content managers or content producers can change them. But it's basically to get things to launch, hence the launch layout, and put them out there as references for other projects down the line.
Let's actually we'll jump out and let's show an example. Let's see, we want this guy. So this is the library, and I preloaded these pages because network access has been spotty. So I'm not gonna navigate and jinx it. But the library is, by default loads with the patterns that we've created. 35 today, and again, as Bill pointed out, these are more controls than they are anything. They're components, and so they're master patterns, if you will. And if we go into an example of one of these and look at the data table pattern, we're actually providing internally. We're providing our dev teams the actual code behind that control, and that control has been based on the pattern work that was designed initially. So this is an example of the data table, which is just tabular data, pretty straightforward. We have half a dozen or so variations of this table that get from simple, which you're looking at here, to extremely complex that allow inline editing and all kinds of other bells and whistles. But all of that code behind is actually in the library and relates back to the original design intent of the pattern itself. So data table, the UI specifications for the data table are some 21 pages of UI spec. And then also there's, we look at the style guides here, we also have visual design variations that show how that table should behave and look from a visual design perspective. We can actually look at the specifications for how that table is laid out. And this is the same for every pattern in our library. We have, those 35 patterns equate to hundreds of variations in design, and the idea is to provide that one central repository for all the development teams worldwide, as well as all of our partners that develop for Dell.com.
Yeah, in looking at the page, if we scroll to the top, you'll see what the kind of the metadata information at the top. This is all searchable. Both the description and the tags. A lot of times a pattern is known as different things across an organization. So we created a pattern, a banner pattern a while back that got tagged as Godzillatron. It got that name, but people wouldn't necessarily think of it as a banner. Some people in the development community shortened it to G-Tron. Some shortened it to X-Tron. Some people would just think of it as a rotating banner, which is what it is, which is what designers would think of it as. But all these things are tagged within the document, so it's searchable. So however you come to the library, whatever label you have fastened to a pattern, hopefully, if you type it into the search box, you'll find it. Cool. And below I think the idea behind the tabs, and one we want to kind of get more toward eventually, is kind of an onion skin treatment, where if you have wireframes, then you peel off a layer and you see the visuals, and then you peel off a layer and then you see the code. So you can kind of see in the tabs that we're going from concept to visual to code. And eventually we want to map those more closely visually in context.
Yeah, we'll touch on that a little bit too, of where we're taking the library. This is version 1.5, and the .5 was a pretty significant enhancement. Both visually and functionally, but the documentation is core, is still the same. So we're talking about what we can do in the future with the documentation aspects of the library and how we can make those even more code-dependent, code-based, and that's kind of part of the future. Let's go back here. Moving on. Bill touched on templates, and Ashley, I was going to get you to talk through some of this. The library isn't just a pattern library; it's really all of Dell's designs, and that is built on a growing list of page templates and page types. And so, you can talk a little bit towards that.
So. See, it's on? I think
Yep.
we're good. So my background is not in design. I'm kind of the odd man or woman out here. My background is in library and information science. So I was brought in specifically to this team to organize all these documents. So things like the metadata that Bill talked about is very important to me. Making sure these documents are easily accessible and can be found and are organized properly. And so in looking at these different document types, like Jim mentioned, we have these things called page templates, which are basically our page layouts. They're designed to be sort of, plug and chug kind of things. You can think of like a Lego grid. So the template is the base foundation, that big green square that we all played with Legos using. And then you take the patterns, which are the individual Lego pieces, and just plug them in. And so with templates, we have two types. We have blank templates, which are where we've basically just called out all the content areas, which are more or less defined by our CMS. And then in complete templates, we go in and define exactly what patterns can go in there, how many patterns can go in there, what types of patterns can go in there, et cetera. So we sort of more granularly define what types of pages we can use. And these templates are defined according to sort of how they function on Dell.com and the page types. So if you want to,
Yep.
And Bill, you can speak to this.
The end goal for this is building pages for a CMS, pages that can be dynamic, some pages that are more open, and some pages that are more restricted in what you can do to them. Currently, on some of the areas of Dell.com, especially old designs, there was a lot of flexibility, so navigation could appear in a lot of different places and can appear very differently in different places. So all that kind of hamstrings the user experience as they go through the site. But if you think of, as an analogy, looking at a blank template, it's more of a foundation or kind of a sketch or blueprint for what can be laid on top of it. If you look at our patterns, these are our patterns or components. These are areas of functionality that we can plug into a page that do have some flexibility. But they're more like the tires. Say if this were a coupe that we're building, you might have 3 different types of tires you could put on this coupe as you're building it. So you select one of the 3 and you put them in there and build the templates based on that. And then at the end of the day, the complete template would be not necessarily one car, but one set of possibilities to build the car. So if there are 3 different types of stereos you can put into the car, you can pick one of those 3. If there's only one type of roof you can put in the car, like the things that you would want to restrict in a website are masthead. You wouldn't want content producers going in there and configuring different mastheads across different pages. So some things, again, kind of that the idea that some pages or some areas on the page are sacrosanct or restricted, and other areas on the page are flexible to provide more marketing and more dynamic content.
So this next slide shows a little bit about how our pages come together. We work with agencies a lot to design comps for us and to create page layouts. And obviously they have to do it according to our design standards. And so a lot of times they come to us and say, how do we go about this process using your design patterns and templates to actually comp out a page? And so this is more or less what we show them. You start with a template, you find the template that you want. We have a source file, PSD file for it. And then so they find the appropriate template, and then they go in and find the patterns that they can plug into the template to create the page that they want. And again, our patterns are also comped out in PSD files that they can download and then just plug in. And so you can kind of see at the top, there's a masthead area where the masthead pattern is used, and then there's the left nav or local nav area on the left. And then we have other, related content patterns and other things that can just be plugged in. So this is what we show them. Start with a template, then go into the pattern section, find the patterns that you need and plug those in. And then any areas that are sort of left open, you can sort of define and tweak as you need. So, and then there's some other documents that are in the library in addition to patterns and templates. We have a section for blueprints. And so blueprints are sort of our way of defining repeatable sets of pages. So if there are certain components that make up pages within a given site section, we can define a blueprint for that site section so that within the section pages are consistent. And then we also put a lot of our project documents in the library. So this serves as kind of like our archive. Oops.
Sorry.
Are we back? That's right. All right, so yeah, the project documents serve as our archives for how we've done things specifically in project work in the past. It's more or less our repository for how we've done things. And in there we have launch layouts for projects, we have page comps for projects. So if we ever want to know, how we treated something, say, in the Premiere section of Dell.com, we can go back to that area and look and see exactly how it was done. That area, we've also implemented a lot of tagging and category structures. So again, like say if we wanted to see how something was treated in Premiere, we could go and select the Premiere category and see all of the projects that related to that category and just sort of filter through those. And then we also have guidelines in the library. And like Jim mentioned, these are more or less the instructions for how to use the documents that are in the library. A lot of them are style guidelines. So we have banner style guidelines. I think, did you pull it up?
Yeah, I did.
So in addition to like the banner pattern, which shows how it's used and sort of visually how it's treated, we have very specific guidelines on banner asset creation. And again, you can see as Jim's scrolling through this, we want our assets to be consistent. And so designers and agencies can come here to see exactly how to create these banner assets. And so these detailed instructions are housed in the guides area of the library. In here we also have documents like our font CSS stack. We use CSS classes to define all of our font specs so that when designers comp patterns in the library, they can just refer to those font classes rather than calling out all the specs, and then the actual specs for those classes are housed here in the guide section.
Yeah.
We also have...
Well, just real quick, yeah, it's also important to point out the difference here between a pattern and the guide. So the pattern explains how it's built, how it works, how people use it, but the guide explains how to build it, what to put in it, and where it can be used. So different audiences for different documents, and hopefully eventually a merger of those two, and again, future state stuff that we're trying to work towards.
Yeah, we also have one of our most popular or most visited documents in the guide section is like copywriting style guidelines, and then also the banner guidelines we mentioned. We are also moving more and more to some of our mobile design documentation. So mobile design guidelines are in there. And again, asset creation guidelines. And then we have tutorials, like we have a glossary for all of our terms that we use in the library. So if you're curious about terms that we're using during this presentation, again, you can go to delldesignlibrary.com, look at our glossary, see how we've defined things, etc. And so the next slide is just who uses our library. We have lots and lots of different teams, obviously as big as our company is. And we also, again, work with a lot of agencies. So we have 291 registered users, which kind of gives you, it might make you think we have a small number of users. But given that it's publicly accessible and the user account is only required for a small number of the documents, we've sort of implemented Google Analytics just to get a better idea of how many visitors we're getting. And kind of to our surprise, within a month we had like 1,300 unique visitors, and we get about 10,000 page views a month. So we have a lot of traffic coming to this site. And again, most of those are agency work to see how to build pages. It's all of our design and development teams across the board coming to see how to build out these different components. Etc. So again, in the next slide, I think it shows, where all of our audience is coming from. Huge global reach. And a lot of this is because Dell is a global company. We have marketing segments and development centers all over the world. And so those development centers are coming to the library when they need to build pages for their segments to make sure it adheres to our global design standards.
Yeah, and the site is hidden from search engines, so it actually isn't crawled. And so the only way people are finding it is through word of mouth or through an event like this. So the people who are using or accessing the library are fundamentally just users. Even though it's publicly available, it's not promoted in any way. And I think it's somewhere on the order of 50% of all visits come from a non-Dell domain, and the vast majority of those are partnerships or development teams that are external to Dell.
Yeah, I think a lot of one of the key takeaways is when we started the library, we knew some of these facets about our audience, but in taking information from analytics, this will help inform our design going forward into tailoring that experience for all these different teams.
Yep, and so again, the next slide, just how do people use the library? We've kind of gone over a lot of this already. How to create comps. Agencies need to create comps. Our internal design teams need to create page comps, so they use the library. Style guidelines. We really encourage people not to just download PDFs of our guidelines because they change almost on a daily basis. And so we encourage people to go to the live library site, see what's current, rather than downloading and printing it out and just viewing that static version. So again, those kind of documents are housed there and accessed from there. And interestingly, our stats show that the most frequently viewed pages are the ones that get updated the most. So people are returning to see these updated versions of our guidelines. And then our developers obviously use the code to program out these different controls. And it's been, we've actually had a close working relationship with our framework development team. Who we have regular weekly, at least, meetings with them to make sure that the controls that they're building align with the standards that we are developing for design.
All right, lessons learned. So this has been an experience for Dell across the board, and a learning experience for everybody involved. Specifically this team too, as we've been trying to move towards a much more regulated experience from a design perspective. We learned a lot, and to set up a library, the first thing we learned is be really close with the people who are building this out. Like I said, we picked ModX as the back end, but ModX didn't develop this site for us. We actually hired another group to come in and build this out for global site design. And we provided them all of the user experience documentation that would be necessary to build the site successfully, but we weren't actively engaged in its creation. And that was a lesson learned. We should have been much more involved or built it in-house. And that was something that came up a lot.
Right. The first iteration, or 1.0 that we put out there, we had built in-house, but we wanted things like faceted nav and classification. We wanted it to perform well, so that's why we outsourced it. But in the course of outsourcing it, the partner that we engaged in, they had a rock star designer that was on the project, but within a couple of months had moved on. So how it was built afterward was a struggle, because a lot of the struggle with a non-subject matter expert in getting up to code is one thing, but in getting up to another software, becoming an expert in that in a short amount of time can be pretty painful.
Yeah. The second one is having somebody to manage the intake process. We have a ton of documents in the library, and without Ashley, who isn't the odd woman out, she's the linchpin of the organization, right? Because without having her moderating what's going in and how it's tagged and where it's classified, the library is not useful at all. And so we go back, and I use the analogy that in a library you don't shelve your own books, and Ashley keeps us honest there, and that's critical.
Yeah, in the past we had designers and UX architects updating documents on the fly themselves, which is great in terms of just getting things updated very quickly. But the problem we had is documentation became inconsistent between one document and the next. So our wireframes would differ from our visual comps because the UX architect updated the wireframe, but the designer didn't update the visual comp. And so one of my jobs is to make sure when I see a new wireframe come in, to make note of any design changes that's going to cause, and to get with a designer and say, hey, these things need to be updated, that kind of thing, just to make sure our documentation is consistent all the way through.
Yeah. Focusing on definitions, we struggled a lot internally on this one. A lot of long conversations about what a pattern is, a lot of philosophies thrown about the room, and it's a difficult thing to pinpoint because anything could be considered a pattern, ultimately. It's a reusable piece of something at its most generic. And getting our library in shape meant really taking a look at what our definitions were, and did that make sense? Did it make sense from our audience's perspective, from our own internal perspective? So all of those things, it took a while. And the first version of the library had over 100 patterns in it. We had a banner static banner pattern. We had a rotating banner pattern. We had
several different types.
There was 4 or 5 different types of banner, when ultimately they're all doing the same thing, just slightly differently. Mm-hmm. And so we made a very concerted effort to stop that sprawl of patternization, if you will, and get really focused on what we were defining as a pattern. Yeah. And then within those big groups, we allow for the growth of variations from design, variations from function, from UI, layout, those kinds of things.
Right, and a lot of what informed that was we did a cycle of usability. After we put 1.5 out, we noticed we had 100 patterns, and then people were overwhelmed, and so we looked to condense them down, and I think now they're about between 30 or 40. So things are a lot more findable. Instead of searching for rotating banner or static banner, they just look for banner, or they type within search static banner or whatever, and they get the banner pattern right there, and it's the only result, so they know where to go. It's really an exercise in progressive disclosure, showing the minimum of what people need to jump to the next step without causing them to be overwhelmed and fail.
Yeah. And then the next one is metadata, everybody's favorite buzzword. We capture a lot of metadata, and we do it for a number of reasons, but one of the things we found is that there are facets in our classification system that aren't utilized today by very many people. Maybe a few percent actually use those classifications, but they're still critical because we can actually look at the data source of where a pattern is used. So if we have a pattern and it is plugged into a particular data source, like our product stack pattern, which shows everything that's associated with a product that Dell sells. That comes from a very specific data source. And we can actually look across all the patterns based on that data source facet. Very few people care about that. But it's there, and the capability is there. And so as we expand and as we grow, that's going to be a critical thing for our development community and everybody else that's touching that pattern, is to understand how we can re-look at all of this information. Ongoing funding. Nobody has a limitless budget, and this project was well funded initially, and then we had to convince people that it was worth keeping internally. And without that ongoing funding, the enhancements that we've made in the last 6 months wouldn't have been possible, and the library would not be very successful. I think it would ultimately, shrivel and die because it's a living site, because it's critical for consistency to be a living site. It's not just a static document that we've thrown up on the web. We have to maintain it, and we have to continue to add to it and enhance its functionality. And that's something that we lost sight of as a team to go and pitch for that ongoing funding initially. And we were very lucky to find enough money to roll into our annual budget to support this. And we will continue to add to that budget, I hope. And then more lessons learned. It really helps to have a wheel of UX to make decisions and to answer all those arguments that we come up with. So we have this wheel, and when we can't decide what to do, we spin it. And sometimes it says make Bill do it, and that's my favorite spot. And then the other thing is to have a benevolent dictator. Jonathan Atkins was supposed to be here this morning, but he is sick. And so we told him we were going to flame him in front of all of you people. And so this is our boss, and unfortunately he couldn't be here, but having somebody make decisions or be the final say actually is a really important thing to move on, and that has helped us quite a bit, having that support. So what's next? I think we talked about some of this, cross-referencing, content sharing across the site. It doesn't do it very well today. We have to do a lot of manual input to accomplish this. Ashley has her hands full sometimes just getting things to reference themselves. So we want to automate this a little bit more, and that will make the library a little bit better. Ashley's implementing an ID system, so our own Dewey Decimal System for shelving our books, and that'll let us be able to pinpoint a very specific instance in the library, so a particular graphic and that kind of thing. And then integration of our own proprietary frameworking or prototyping tool. That's in the works. We're talking about moving to iRise from a documentation standpoint, and we anticipate that becoming a part of the library experience. Not quite sure how yet, but we're working on that. And then multi-channel. We're primarily focused on .com today, although we've done a number of mobile apps and tablet apps, but we're looking across all channels of application development, mobile, personalization, B2B channels within Dell, and rolling all of that into the library ultimately. So that is all we have. So thank you for your time, and if there are any questions.
I was just wondering how often you actually push updates to Dell Design Library.
Daily.
Daily, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Hourly. Yeah, it's live. One of the three of us is in it almost all the time. Okay. Ashley's in it constantly.
And I have one other question. Aside from your global site design team, have there been any type of maybe a hesitation from other design teams to use your patterns? I love this stuff, but I could imagine, a visual designer being like, Jesus Christ, I just want to put a banner on my site, and I don't want to have to read through 17 specs and all these requirements that I have to do.
The neat thing about this library is that once it gets out there, then people start looking at it and they use it, and then they start integrating their own functionality and their own wikis to it. So that code that we're consuming is done by our app framework team. So we just recently got them ported into our library. Copy editors, they just recently got their copy guidelines in there. The library is becoming kind of the bar that everyone goes to get all their documentation, and that's another thing that we're working on going forward.
Yeah, and the other thing to point out is the library represents current state, which is why it's public, because there's nothing in the library that you can't go and find somewhere live on Dell.com. It does not, at least the public view, does not represent the 16-month vision, the 3-year vision, and all of that creative work is being done by this team as well. So to answer your question, designers who are creating current state pages don't have a whole lot of flexibility, but designers who are creating the vision for Dell.com do. Absolutely.
So last year I worked with Jonathan using the design pattern library, and one of the things that really amazed me was how much time and due diligence you guys do with actually testing patterns before you put it in the library and you make them official. We ran into a snafu with some work that we'd been doing with China, and I'd like to hear a little bit more about what you do to test patterns for the worst case scenarios.
Yeah, so Dell is a very metric-driven organization, and we don't do anything without data, and both quantitative and qualitative. So everything that's in the library has been well tested, both before it launches and then after it launches, to make sure that it's performing. And if it doesn't perform, it dies a slow death, or sometimes a very quick, exciting death.
And we also do international testing, so we're not just testing in Round Rock. We go to different countries and vet the designs there to make sure they're globalized.
Yep. Yeah.
I was just wondering what some of the top considerations were when you were looking at the back-end products and how you settled on ModX, and roughly what the cost is, if you could share that.
The first one's easy. The classification system, the faceted navigation system that ModX provides was critical. There is very little navigation in the library. Matter of fact, I can't show you, but most of the library is just a big filter where we're just displaying the content, and you filter away what you don't want to see. And that was pretty critical to get people to what we felt was the most important parts of the library. As far as cost, the back-end system's very cheap, if not open source, right?
I think so,
Yeah, so it's open source, but to develop against it's a typical development effort.
I don't know if we pointed out, but they're here in Dallas. I mean, they're
a local company, and actually I think they are here at this conference today. So definitely look into ModX. We've been very happy, and we're actually partnering with them now to continue enhancements, and they're doing our development work for us.
Well, I think we're out of time. Thank again our speakers today.
Thank
if you
you.
would.